An interesting, some would say ominous article about Drake Maye. That's where we start on this episode of Locked On Patriots.
You are Locked On Patriots, your daily New England Patriots podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Patriots fans? I am your host, Nick Cattles, born and raised in New England, your New England Patriots expert, host of the Everything Pats podcast, co-host of the Greg Bedard Patriots podcast with Nick Cattles, and also a sports talk show host veteran. On today's episode, a 53-man roster projection that has me in deep thought, and a common theme about 2024's draft class is revealing itself. But first, a floor-ceiling suggestion that might make your head spin. We appreciate you joining the show, making us your first listen, and for being an everydayer. The Locked On Patriots podcast, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And a reminder, we're doing 3 shows a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday until Monday, July 14th, when we go back to a daily show Monday through Friday. I have high hopes for Drake Maye's second NFL season. I do believe he will be better this year than he was in 2024, but a Pro Football Focus article came out over the past few days, and it stopped me dead in my tracks. Now, this Pro Football Focus article took a look at all the second-year quarterbacks in the NFL, looking at the top 6 guys. Of course, you know the names: Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake Maye, and so on. And this article was written by John Costco. And here's what he wrote, in part. The Patriots, unfortunately, put one of the worst supporting casts around Maye, so his projections moving forward really shouldn't change based on his performance in 2024. I agree with that. I think most of you would agree with that. It was so bad last year. The offensive line was so bad. The lack of weapons was so bad that it is truly difficult to gauge what Drake Maye is going to be in 2025, 2026, and beyond from what happened in 2024. But then Pro Football Focus, John Costco, I will call him Mr. Costco, gave us his ceiling and his floor for Drake Maye. The ceiling was Trevor Lawrence. The floor was Daniel Jones. Now, let me start with the Lawrence ceiling. If you look at Trevor Lawrence, you could say there are some similarities to Lawrence and Drake Maye. You look at the arm. Both guys have very good arm strength, considered one of the best arms in college football when they were playing back in college. You could look at their athleticism. The athleticism of Trevor Lawrence, the athleticism of Drake Maye. You might even say that Trevor Lawrence is a bit more athletic than Maye is. I don't even know if that's debatable. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Then you look at the size. Trevor Lawrence is 6'6". Drake Maye is about 6'4". Both dudes around 220 pounds. So the arm, the legs, the frame, the size, pretty similar to each other. Which begs the question, how does Pro Football Focus look at Trevor Lawrence? Because a lot of people are split on Lawrence. He's a pretty polarizing quarterback. Some people believe that he's still going to be a very good QB. Some people believe that he was overrated coming out of Clemson. And the class, when you look back at 2021, as we know, Mac Jones was a part of that quarterback class. Everybody else makes Lawrence look terrific in comparison. But when you look at PFF and how they feel about Lawrence, heading into 2025, they have Lawrence ranked as the 16th quarterback in the league. So smack dab in the middle. 32 starting quarterbacks, day one of the season, 16th is Lawrence. And here's what they wrote. The talent is undeniable, but he's yet to show the consistent high-level play needed to elevate himself and the Jaguars into the NFL's elite. Now, it's tough to project Lawrence heading into 2025 because he only started 10 games last year due to injury. But if you have Lawrence at 16, where do you think Drake Maye is? I'll tell you. PFF has Drake Maye ranked 22nd heading into 2025. Here's what they wrote. With Vrabel taking over as head coach and upgrades around him, the number 3 overall pick from 24 is positioned to take a step forward in year 2. I expect it. You expect it. One part of Drake Maye's game that we still haven't seen taken advantage of, and I think we'll see it with Josh McDaniels, is designed runs. The run impact from your quarterback. Lawrence has had some of that in Jacksonville. I believe Maye will have some of that this year. But what is Trevor Lawrence's ceiling? Because that's what we need to know. We know how Pro Football Focus feels about him going into 2025. But how does PFF feel about Lawrence, and what could his ceiling be, and what has Lawrence's ceiling shown itself to be so far through his NFL career? Well, if you look at the best PFF grade that he ever got overall, it was back in 2023. He had a 79.7 overall grade. That was a career high. Brock Purdy was the 10th highest graded quarterback last year with an overall grade of an 82.4. So if Lawrence's ceiling is top 10-ish or being a top 10 quarterback, then Maye's ceiling being a top 10 quarterback, I don't believe is too far off. Now, maybe you have different gradations. Maybe you feel like Maye would be 7th, 6th, 8th, 9th, 10th. But if Lawrence is seen as a guy who has the opportunity, the potential, the chance to be a top 10 quarterback, then in essence, what Mr. Costco is telling us with this ceiling for Drake Maye is that he could be a top 10 quarterback right in that region. So I don't think that's a huge slight to Maye. However, the Daniel Jones floor thing drives me nuts. Daniel Jones. I know that there were some comparisons to Jones with Maye when Maye was coming out. I think there are a few reasons why that is. That doesn't have much to do with actually how they play football, but I digress. When you look at Jones, the first thing about Daniel Jones that holds him back as an NFL quarterback, and maybe he'll be much better this year in Indianapolis if he wins the job from Anthony Richardson, but the key to Jones being limited is his arm strength. He does not have a very strong arm. Maye has a strong arm. And that's such a huge difference between those two talents. If somebody has a very good arm and somebody has a manageable arm, the very good arm is much more likely to succeed. And then I look at Maye's intangibles, and I wonder if Jones has the level of compete that Maye has. We know that Maye is a feisty competitor. He will fight, fight, fight. I haven't seen that from Jones. Maye comes across as an alpha. Somebody who will control the room, somebody who knows how to talk to the room, somebody who his teammates will follow him. Jones really hasn't given that alpha aura off since he was drafted by the New York Giants. And then you have Jones, who literally becomes a puddle against pressure. And we saw Maye in his rookie season face as much pressure as anybody has faced. Maybe you got to go back to the David Carr days in Houston, but Maye handled that pressure pretty well. So I just feel like Maye's makeup is much better than Jones's, and I think his natural talent, because of the arm strength, is better than Jones's. And when you look at Daniel Jones's stats, his most productive season was his rookie season when he threw 24 touchdowns. His best passer rating was a 92.5 in 2022. Maye's passer rating last year was 88.1, which would have been Jones's second best passer rating of his NFL career. When you look at QBR, Jones's best QBR was a 62.9 again in 2022. Drake Maye's QBR last year was 58.6, which would have been Jones's second best QBR of his NFL career. And Daniel Jones during that 2022 season had Brian Daboll and Saquon Barkley in the backfield. We all know what Maye had and didn't have last year, beginning with Alex Van Pelt. So you're telling me that's the floor of Drake Maye? I just think that floor is too low. But year 3 is going to be the ultimate tell. It is going to be the ultimate tell of how far along Maye can get. Because just like Josh Allen, year 2 was a little bit of a bump, and then year 3 was the gigantic step forward, the gigantic leap. And year 3 will be the ultimate tell of ceiling versus floor for Maye. I'm not looking at 2025 as an either or of those. I'm just not looking at it and saying to myself, well, this is the best. This is the ceiling that Maye can hit. And I'm also not looking at it and saying, oh, well, that's just the floor. We'll see what happens. I would hope that Drake May's floor was last season, given what he had to deal with, and I feel like it probably is going to be that. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't think I am, but maybe I'm wrong. But next year is going to be the big year, the second year with the offensive coordinator. I think an even better offensive line. Hopefully they find a true alpha wide receiver. Maye has fully adjusted to the NFL after they adjusted to what he does well. But Daniel Jones as the floor, give me a break. I could see the Trevor Lawrence stuff. All right, a local scribe has his 53-man projection, and I have 3 important observations from that projection. It's coming up next as we continue with today's episode of Locked On Patriots, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app, folk. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. I mean, when you look at it, how has everything in one app made it easier to manage your money if you had that going on day to day? Could you just imagine one single app not bopping around through a bunch of others, making your head dizzy, giving you the cold sweats? When you got one financial goal that you want to get serious about, Monarch Money can help you out with that as well. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. There are going to be some competitions during this training camp, and we are officially about 3 weeks away from training camp beginning. But I don't believe there's as much for grabs that's going to be up during this training camp for the 53-man roster. And the reason why is there's been so much turnover to this roster already that you have just a number of guys that are on this 53 or going to be 90-man when you first walk in. So many guys that this regime has brought in. Terrell Williams, Vrabel, Josh McDaniels, so many connections to this coaching staff. And I think you have to give the advantage as we get ready for camp to those guys who have been brought in this offseason, because this coaching staff, this front office led by Mike Vrabel and Ryan Cowden now, along with Eliot Wolf, they had a clear idea as to where they wanted to go when it comes to talent and when it comes to a guy's comportment, his attitude, his personality away from the field. So you've got a bunch of this regime's guys that are going to be walking in the Patriots camp for the very first time, and I give them the leg up, given the circumstances. But Doug Kyed came out with his pre-training camp 53-man roster, and I have 3 observations about the 53 from Kyed. His wide receiver room is as follows: Kendrick Bourne, Kayshon Boutte, Pop Douglas, Stephon Diggs, Mac Hollins, Efton Chisholm, Kyle Williams. Now, many of you are going to be very happy just with the fact that Efton Chisholm has made his 53-man roster. But to me, the wide receiver room, when you just look at those 7 names that Kyed puts on his 53-man, the wide receiver room is bananas. 7 guys? Do you think the Patriots will carry 7 receivers? I find it very difficult to believe that this football team will have 7 receivers on the 53 in week 1. That's too much of a luxury for me. To have a 7th receiver, carrying 6, some would even argue, is a bit heavy. Carrying 7? I don't think you need 7 wide receivers on this 53. I do think putting a 7th is a luxury. Throughout the last few months, I've been talking about how I would kind of situate things position by position, numbers-wise, not even just talking names, but just looking at the numbers. And I feel much better about having 6 wide receivers than 7. I would like to devote that 7th wide receiver spot to another position on the roster, which I will get to in a couple of minutes. 7 receivers, too much of a luxury. It's interesting that Kyed, again, has Efton Chisholm in. If Efton Chisholm is in, then there's going to be at least 2 guys out, 3 guys out that you might not have thought would be out when last season ended. Maybe some of you did think that Jalen Polk would be out no matter what. I'm still giving him a chance. It's an outside chance, but I'm still giving Jalen Polk a chance. But if Chisholm is in, that makes it much more difficult for Polk to get in. Javon Baker, he's behind Jalen Polk, and Polk's been injured. He's coming off a surgery for his shoulder. And Baker can't even get on the field with Drake Maye. So 7 receivers on the 53, and with 7 guys in that room, Doug Kyed still doesn't have Polk and Baker in there. Instead, he's got, if you really look at it, Chisholm and Booty. So Chisholm and Booty make it over Polk and Baker. Interesting stuff. Let's look at the offensive line. Doug Kyed, here's how he breaks it down. Jared Wilson, Garrett Bradbury at center. Your offensive tackles, Will Campbell, Marcus Bryant, Morgan Moses, Caden Wallace. Your guards, Sidy Sow, Cole Strange, and Mike Owenu. Now, I want to make this note. I believe this Doug Kyed 53-man roster projection came out before the Patriots signed Yasir Durant. I don't know if that would make a big difference. Probably not, but I'm not going to speak for Kyed. Maybe it would have made a big difference. Not sure. 9 offensive linemen feels light. Just like 7 wide receivers feels a little bit heavy. And it's interesting that you have 9 offensive linemen. Neither Robinson makes it. So Tyrese Robinson, not on this roster. Layden Robinson, not on this roster. Now, Layden Robinson's having issues. We'll get to him a little bit later in this podcast. So I don't think it's a reach to say Layden Robinson could be in trouble. Tyrese Robinson, I do think, has a chance to make this roster. The last time we saw him before his, unfortunate passing of his sister, which kept him from mandatory minicamp, Tyrese Robinson was getting some looks at left guard. He was getting reps. So it's interesting that neither Robinson is on Kyed's 53. How about Ben Brown? Now, Garrett Bradbury to me is a question mark. I've said that from the beginning. His pass protection issues are real issues. And it's going to be a problem if he proves to not be better in that category. So do you feel good enough to not have a Ben Brown on the roster? And I'm not telling you that Brown is great. I'm just saying Jared Wilson missed OTAs, missed mandatory minicamp. Hopefully he's out there during training camp, but he's obviously dealing with an injury. And so I haven't seen much of anything from Wilson just yet. He's going to make the roster, but do you feel confident in his ability to help you day one? We have to see. But this is a pre-training camp 53-man roster. So, yes, Wilson will be on it, but do you need some insurance at center given Wilson's injury situation and the stuff that I just mentioned with Bradbury? So it's somewhat intriguing that Ben Brown is not on this 53. Then when you look at it, you have 1 backup guard. I don't think that's going to happen. Maybe it will. I don't think it's going to happen. Doug Kyed has Sidy Sow, Cole Strange, and Mike Owenu. So right now you'd say Strange would be your starting left guard. Obviously, Owenu is your starting right guard, which leaves Sow as your only backup. So you have 1 backup at center, 1 backup at guard. You've got 2 backup interior offensive linemen with a number of injury and performance questions on the interior offensive line. I would add at least 1 guard to that mix. I would probably take a guard over the Ben Brown center thing because I believe you can go out and get somebody like Ben Brown like they did last year. But I would put 1 more offensive lineman. I would take 1 receiver away, so I'd have 6 receivers. I'd have 6 receivers and 10 offensive linemen. I don't like 7 and 9. All right, lastly, let's take a look at safety. Doug Kyed, his pre-training camp 53. He has Duggar, Peppers, Hawkins, Woodson, Pettis, Schooler. So he's got 6 safeties. 6 safeties on the week 1 roster. He has Hawkins over Marcus Epps. Now, Hawkins, that'd be interesting because he's more of an in-the-box option at safety. and you feel like you've got Duggar, you've got Peppers, both those guys can play in the box, but maybe you keep Hawkins as that security if one of those two guys gets hurt. Hawkins also plays a role on special teams, much like Schooler. I mean, Schooler will be he'll be listed as a safety, but it's really just a flex because Schooler, in case of an emergency, you got to break the glass, you can throw him back there. And we saw him play some snaps last year, very limited role, but he played some snaps last year at safety. So that's, in case of an emergency type option. Schooler's on the team, obviously, because he's excellent at what he does on special teams. So you really got 5 guys if you're not going to play Schooler on the defense. But Hawkins is the interesting one to me because, Epps, does he fit coming off ACL? Reportedly didn't have the strongest OTA/mandatory minicamp. So we'll see if he gets better as he gets into training camp. Hawkins wasn't necessarily good last year. I mean, he was there. He was assignment sure at times, but I wouldn't say that Hawkins jumped out to any of us. So I do think it's interesting. I could see Hawkins beat Epps given what Epps hasn't or has done in OTA's mandatory minicamp. And I'm just looking at Craig Woodson. I think it's a legitimate option for Woodson to start on this team this year, or at least play a major role as that third safety coming off. So we'll see. The 2024 draft class, aside from Drake Maye, all seem to have the same flaw. It's coming up next as we continue with today's episode of Locked On Patriots, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The NFL draft is an inexact science. You have to do the work. But even if you do the work, it's no guarantee that you're going to pick the right guy. We see it all the time. And it's not just because of on-the-field issues. It's also because of off-the-field issues. What has a guy done or not done personally that could bother you? Is that guy a leader? Is he seen as somebody who takes his role seriously within the football team? On the field, what kind of flaws does he have? And I really want to focus on the off-the-field makeup stuff when it comes to the 2024 draft class. Because I read a note from Greg Bedard, and this is something that's been kind of brewing in my head for a while. Looking at the class from last year, something's going on, right? Something's going on. Aside from Drake Maye, there's just so many question marks about that class from a year ago. And Bedard at BSJ recently wrote about Caden Wallace. Multiple league sources say he has all the physical tools to play offensive tackle, even left tackle. But something is missing, like a lot of the 2024 draft class. But something is missing. Jalen Polk was seen as a very mature leader of a team type guy. And when he got here, he wasn't as advertised. His comportment on the sidelines, his comportment on the field at times, going to social media, some of the stuff he said to the media themselves. He was supposed to have borderline perfect makeup. But quickly we saw some of these things pop up. Something was missing. Javon Baker, I think, came almost totally as advertised. Talented, but the will he ever, quote unquote, get it reputation. Because something with Baker is missing. Something in the makeup. Layden Robinson, mentioned him a little bit earlier. And many people have written about Robinson over the past few weeks. He's tumbling down the depth chart. Suffers from a lack of focus. Pre-snap penalties during OTAs and mandatory minicamp. Doesn't quite understand his responsibilities on the field. Seems like there's something missing. Maybe doesn't have the work ethic that you would hope for. Then you had Joe Milton, who you traded because you were concerned how he was going to impact the makeup of your quarterback room. You felt like for him to be the backup of Drake Maye, he wouldn't be able to handle that. He wouldn't maturely handle the situation. Again, something was missing. Polk, Baker, Robinson, Milton. And I look at that draft class, aside from Maye, that's full of questions, and I truly wonder why there are so many questions about these players and why seemingly the Patriots swung and missed on almost all of them and didn't truly understand what made them tick. Or maybe they just felt like they knew what made them tick and they took some wild swings and hoped for the best, crossing their fingers. Is it because Eliot Wolf's involvement was so in-depth with Gerard Mayo trying to put together his coaching staff that actually took time away from Wolf, and Wolf had less time to vet some of these prospects himself? Did Wolf have less time to vet these prospects through his staff in the front office? Had less time talking about these guys? Had less time digging into the details? I know reportedly that Wolf, he almost had to hold Gerard Mayo's hand through the staffing process because Mayo just did not have enough connections throughout the NFL. That no doubt took some time away from Wolf in the job that he was supposed to do. And did that mean that the Patriots overall, because the guy who was running the front office wasn't around as much as he should have been, does that mean that the front office gathered less intelligence about these players? Less info, less legwork, less background on some of them. Maybe they feel like they were hoodwinked because the people they spoke with maybe didn't tell them the whole story. Was this an operational mess? I feel like it's easy to say yes, but why? Well, you got to look at how this was put together a year ago and the fact that your front office was in between grading systems. You had the Belichick grading system. Then you had Eliot Wolf's Packers grading system. The Packers grading system is what was used this time around. Last year, they did not have enough time because they were knee-deep in trying to figure out all these prospects. They could not turn over the grading system and begin from, scratch in February. It's impossible. So that grading system from the Packers days, it didn't hit until this last draft. So you're in between grading systems, which kind of gives you a gray area. You're kind of juggling around guys and saying, okay, well, what would we grade him here? And what would we grade him there? And, well, that was what the Belichick grading system would tell us. But do we really feel great about that guy? I'm sure there was a certain amount of unknown about how they truly wanted to handle each and every prospect when they were going through that grading system. And then you look at the hierarchy of the front office, namely Eliot Wolf trying to find his voice. He brings in Alonzo Highsmith. Alonzo Highsmith had not worked with most of the front office last year. He was brought in as Wolf's guy. So Eliot Wolf, first time as a GM, trying to figure out his ways, holding the hand of his head coach and working with him to try to fill the coaching staff, missing some pivotal dates that Wolf should have gone to because he was wrapped up in things he shouldn't have been wrapped up in, but had to be wrapped up in between grading systems. And then Alonzo Highsmith comes on. He's working with a bunch of new people. What was last year's draft more gut? Is that what happened? It's a very strange thing. And it's especially strange when you compare last year's class to this year's class. And yes, I know Mike Vrabel and Ryan Cowden came in and Stretch came in, but those guys came in January, and a lot of the work, most of the work was already done, which is why Wolf was here and he was a pivotal part of the process because he had done all the work with his front office for the past year. And Vrabel came in and said, okay, well, this is what I'm looking for. And Wolf took that information and they cultivated a list of guys that Vrabel would like and who would fit Vrabel's system. And then they went from there. But when you look at the makeup of these players in 2025, it's fascinating because it's much different than what we saw in 2024. There's been lots of culture talk, lots of leadership talk, lots of maturity talk with this class. And it just leaves you to wonder, was it as simple as Eliot Wolf was slotted in his position, which is something that you hope was the case last year, and he was fully comfortable and had his grading system? And obviously, Vrabel and Cowden and Stretch helped out tremendously as well. But maybe Eliot Wolf, he was able to go back to his scouting days more than he was like the GM try last year. And he was more comfortable kind of filling a lot of the same role that he had filled before last year. And Vrabel was the guy who he knew was going to drop the hammer and really had the final say. So maybe the strengths of Eliot Wolf is the scouting particular players and being able to put the work in and working on that side of it instead of, trying to run the whole operation and delegate and talk to everybody else in the front office and try to handle all of it. It's interesting because last draft, it just feels like it couldn't be any more different than this year's draft. All right, that wraps up this edition of Locked On Patriots. Reach out to me on Twitter at NickCRadio. Don't forget to throw a comment in the YouTube channel. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe as well. Thank you for making Locked On Patriots your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On NFL Scouting. It is tremendous. You can find it on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Have a great day. We will see you on Wednesday.